We're live coast to coast. Normally at this time of night, we go to Open Phone America. However, tonight we have a very important topic and therefore an additional guest. In a moment, we'll meet Joe Holsinger. Mr. Holsinger was the former administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan of Northern California. Congressman Ryan, you remember, was killed in Jonestown, Guyana. Mr. Holsinger believes that we have not heard the whole story, testified before a House committee on the subject. We'll find out what that whole story may or may not be, or why we need more investigation. A couple of notes. Our new station this week, and a great pleasure to welcome aboard one of the great stations in the United States, Wave Radio, WAV, the former administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan of Northern California. It's very nice to have you come aboard, and I appreciate you coming aboard at this hour.
Thank you very much.
How long were you his administrative assistant?
4 years, from 1975 through 78.
What were you doing before that?
Real estate development in Southern California, and prior to that, my own furniture distribution company in Northern California. Leo and I had been friends for a long time.
Most administrative assistants come usually from the press corps, don't they? And they were either doing PR for the candidate or the like. I mean, it seems strange that a businessman comes in. Well, how did it come about?
Well, Leo and I had been very close friends. I had been the chairman of his political campaigns, and he and I were the closest of friends. And when I made a change from moving back to Northern California from Southern California, Leo thought it'd be a good idea if I came aboard and helped him straighten out his office in Washington, the office on the coast. And it was sort of a transition thing, that a one-year job that turned into 4 years, and we were such good friends and enjoyed the work that we just stuck together.
How did you like living here?
Well, I really didn't care for it that much. San Francisco area is so great that I spent as much time as I could on the coast. I had a home out on the coast, and Leo had a home here. We just shared our homes together.
San Francisco?
We're both bachelors, yeah.
San Francisco can spoil you.
Oh, yes.
Leo was a bachelor?
Well, he had been divorced, yes.
And now you're doing what? So we know.
I'm back in real estate development, industrial real estate development in Northern California.
Where were you when Leo was killed?
I was in San Mateo County, back in the district. It was after the election, and rather than return to Washington, I had stayed on in California. And I had wanted to go to Guyana with him, but his rule always was, when he went out of the country, since I was in charge of both offices, that I was to stay behind in case anything went wrong, and or he needed somebody back here, so I stayed behind to try to run things.
You wanted to go with him?
I would have preferred to, yes.
Were you one of those who wanted him not to go?
Yes, I was. I was concerned about it because we had done the investigative work ahead of time. And we knew that it was, if only half of what we had been told was true, that it could be a very dangerous situation there. He was aware of that. We warned our government about it. They never warned Leo. He warned them. They seemed to ignore it and try to pretend that there was nothing going wrong down there, although we now knew that they admit that they knew, but they didn't tell him. And why they haven't told him, why they didn't tell him, is one of the things that bears further investigation.
You knew him so well. Why did he go, Joe?
It was a very simple thing. He had been told by people in his district, constituents, that they had relatives there that were being held against their will. And he was a very strong believer in human rights. He believed in representing his constituents. And the more we dug into it, the more we found out the likelihood, the possibility that something very wrong was going on. And the more he dug into it, the more the State Department stonewalled us. Other members of Congress had tried to get information and been pushed aside, but Leo Ryan was not a man who was pushed aside very easily. And he determined to go down to determine the truth of Jonestown and the People's Temple, if necessary, to help lead people out of there, but in any case, to find out whether or not it was an open society, an open colony, and whether people could leave if they wished to do so. And so he was down there just to do the job as he saw it, representing his constituency.
Frankly, some congressmen might have sent an investigator, asked for a report from the government, and taken the government report and reported that to the constituency. That made Leo very unusual, did it?
Yes, he was an unusual man. He always believed in finding out for himself. He did ask the State Department to send down a special investigating team to investigate the allegations, which he had passed on to them. They refused to do so. As a matter of fact, he asked them to send an attorney down. They have hundreds of attorneys in the State Department. He asked them to send one attorney down with him on his congressional delegation that he led down there. They refused, saying they didn't have anybody to swear. They were too busy to send even one person down. That was only another example of the pushing away treatment we got. So the only way, Leo only went down because there was no other way to find out what was really going on. Investigators were not welcome. He had to have the power of Congress behind him to push his way in.
I don't want to relive bitter memories, but just so, because the public should remember this, in fact, should remember it more often than it does. Where were you when Leo was... How did you hear about it?
Well,
You were in San Mateo.
I was in my home in Foster City in San Mateo County, just south of the airport, and I had been on the phone all day. The night before, I don't pray too often, but I had prayed for the night before because I was overwhelmed with the sense of possibility of danger. I knew he had gone into Jonestown. And so I was phoning the State Department, the Guyana desk or the Caribbean desk, several times during that day. I knew that they changed shifts at the State Department, and so I was wanting to make sure that if anything came through, I heard about it. And so along about, I think it was, as I recall, it was probably around 2:15 California time, about 5:15 Washington time, and 7:15 Guyana time, I had my first call from the State Department. And the reason I recall the timing was because the duty officer had just left. So they called me before they called the duty officer, who was on her way home, and they said it was a woman who was on her way home, and to inform me that there had been a shooting incident at Port Kaituma airstrip, and there were reports that maybe up to 3 people had been killed, one of whom may have been Leo, and that several people, maybe 13 or 14, had been wounded. That's all they had. And then about 10 minutes later, I had a call from the White House, from somebody I knew at the White House, to tell me that 5 had been killed, and that Leo was one of the 5. And when I guess I was in a semi-shock, I said, well, that wasn't, I just had a report from the State Department, and that didn't jibe exactly with what I had been told. And then my person who called me from the White House, whom I knew, said, Joe, our information is correct. We have a CIA report from the scene. And so that's how I first found out that, but the reason they called, as I found out, determined later, they asked me for the names of the people who had been killed by giving me they knew that I knew the people in the media who were down there, and I was able to identify them by name, Don Harris and Bob Brown and so on, because I had met with them along with Leo. That meant whoever had informed them did not know them well enough to know their names, but knew what they had done. And I later determined that the informant must have been the pilot of the airplane, a man named Guy Spence, who a former RAF pilot, and he was the man who took that little plane out.
How many did die? 5?
5, exactly 5, and there were quite a few wounded, but maybe 12 or so were wounded.
We're going to find out in a minute why Joe Holsinger thinks the story should not end. We'll be right back, coast to coast on Mutual. We'll take calls as well. I understand has testified before the House International Relations Committee, and his position, according to the note from my producer, is that there needs to be further investigations into the entire Jonestown tragedy. Why?
Well, I've changed my thinking to some extent as to just what may have happened there because of information I received after I testified in Washington in February. At that time, I knew that there had been an involvement by at least some elements of our intelligence operation. And I'd like at this point to just state for the record that the Central Intelligence Agency has many parts to it. Basically, it's divided into 2 parts. One is intelligence gathering and evaluation. The second is what we call covert or hidden operations. And I think that our country has to have that capacity, that capability. But as far as the covert operations are concerned, it's terribly important that they be controlled and that they not be out of hand. And that's a great controversy, how you can keep something secret and still keep it fully controlled. But we found that one of the, and I never did, incidentally, disclose publicly the report I had from the White House for over a year because I felt that this sort of thing had to be protected. But then in December of 1979, a story broke in the San Mateo Times from investigators there that indicated that one of our deputy chief of mission in Guyana, Richard Dwyer, had gone back into Jonestown after the murders at Port Kaituma, and the FBI possessed tapes which had Jones shouting, "Get Dwyer out of here, get Dwyer out of here." And when I discovered later that Dwyer was in effect CIA, he was a station chief there and had been CIA since 1959, that put an entirely different light on everything. It meant further than I had come across information indicating that our government had worked closely with Jones and with the People's Temple. And
Our government did.
And with the government of Guyana.
For what purpose?
It appeared that the purpose was to control the government of Guyana so it wouldn't fall into communist hands. And that there was sort of a triangle there. We had the government of Guyana, whom we had put in and helped to stay in, we and the British. And then we had the People's Temple, who worked with the government of Guyana, and they had a relationship where they acted as sort of the enforcers against any opposition to the existing government of Guyana. And we had a relationship with Jones, which was very curious. And that was what puzzled me and led me to ask for more information. At the time, I believed that it was likely that we were protecting our interests there, our commercial interests there, bauxite, manganese, and exports. And that was the thrust. But I did, upon digging in, find out that the State Department, which had consistently stonewalled all our requests for information that we made before they went down there, under the Privacy Act, and they gave us nothing. Later, they had hundreds and thousands of documents, but they refused to give D'Elia, which he had every right to have. But they just stonewalled us. But when we made inquiries about the People's Temple, which we did consistently for a year prior to going down there, everything we ever asked the State Department about was immediately given to Jones. The State Department has admitted this. They claimed they gave that to him under the Freedom of Information Act. So we were in a situation where our requests were turned down under the Privacy Act. Everything we did or said was given to Jones under Freedom of Information, and that doesn't make sense.
If Jones had the full support of this government, as you contend, why would he be so worried about the Ryan visit? Why would he want Ryan killed? Why would he kill himself? Why would he go through all this if he's got that kind of clout?
He didn't kill himself, first of all. And that's why we're so curious about Richard Dwyer going back in there after the Port Kaituma murders. Just what his purpose was in going back.
He did not kill himself.
He did not. He was murdered by a shot to the temple, and not from close. It was not. There was no powder burns. Most of the people down there were murdered rather than committed suicide, we now find. The chief medical examiner for Guyana, Dr. Leslie Moto, has testified that over 7 of the 900 down there were murdered, either by injection up in the shoulder blade area of the poison, or by shot or gunshot wound. That is not what the story that came out, but we were fed a mythology about Jonestown. And the curious thing that comes to light now is that there have been charges made which I ignored at first, which I now believe have some credibility, may be valid. It's the idea that the Jonestown and People's Temple may have been what we call a massive mind control experiment.
CIA mind control?
Apparently, that's the charge. And we had operations called MK Ultra in this country, and prior to that, Operation Artichoke, which were mind control experiments in which the CIA utilized the Veterans Administration hospitals, the federal prisons and state prisons for their experiments on these people, unwilling patients. And over 20 years of this. And then in 1974, Richard Helms testified before a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, in which he said that they had discontinued Operation MK Ultra, excuse me, and that they had destroyed all the documents and it was over. But it now appears possible, or even likely, that all they did was switch it over to the cults, went private with it. Huge quantities of drugs were found in Jonestown, mind-controlled drugs. All the drugs that are used for mind control were found there in vast quantities. They had a very modern hospital there, and they had daily medical checkups for a great number of people. But despite all the records were taken of Jonestown, it appears now there are absolutely no records of any of this hospital activity, despite the fact that Jones kept very meticulous records on everything. So we tie that in with the going back and reviewing the newspaper reports at the time. We find out that the day or two after the disaster down there. The reports came out varying between 383 and 409 people killed there. I personally talked to one of the survivors, one of the young men who walked away and said he was going to get a stethoscope. And he went back the next day. He helped identify the people there. They turned over the bodies, toe tagged them. At the time, there were no bodies underneath. That's went on, and about 5 days later, days after our people went in there, and after the Guyanese government had sent people in there, they started changing the figures. And 5 days afterwards, the figures rose to over 700, and 6 days later, it became over 900 people. And the story given out was that these bodies were all found underneath the original bodies, which couldn't have been true. So the horrifying question comes up: where do these bodies come from that weren't there at the beginning? We also have reports of at least 10 helicopters searching the area of people fleeing towards Venezuela, and we have to go back and wonder. Now, despite all these rituals we knew about the suicide drills in San Francisco, whether or not the ultimate drill was held was only partially successful. And whether Leo's visit down there had resulted in their deciding to go through with some ultimate drill.
Trying to figure out the scenario. Who killed Jones?
He didn't commit suicide. I think he was killed to shut him up, because I think that we have links with Jones going way to 1962-63, being in Brazil in 62-63, having his groceries delivered by an American consulate staff car, and receiving government checks in 62-63.
CIA?
I think he was in touch with him. I think that he went through Guyana in South America and Central America in the late 60s looking for a place to settle before he had any trouble in San Francisco, before he could claim he had to leave.
I didn't know that. Why, though, do you think he killed Leo? I mean, that part befuddles me.
Well, I think that once Leo was able to break down the doors, he went down. Leo was determined that if he couldn't get into Jonestown, he would march up to the gates of Jonestown with the media to prove that it was not open, and come back with that as proof to the rest of other members of Congress that something needed to be looked at. And once it appeared that Leo had won the media battle, they decided to let him in and take a chance. But once he was in there, if anyone got out of there who could describe what was going on down there, then the whole experiment the whole thing was in danger.
You think Leo found out?
I think that, excuse me, I think that he was going to escort several people out, 15 people coming out. And I think that was the trigger, because if those people had come out, then they may have brought information out with them that they didn't want to get out of there. And I think that was either possibly that he had information coming out, or there was information coming out from it, or they decided that that this was now the time to pull the plug. If it's true that they had a mind control experiment, and this was the time to go through with the experiment and the ultimate attempt to get people to destroy themselves.
The embassy member, I forget his name, who you say Jones yelled out his name.
Dwyer, Richard Dwyer.
Where is he now?
He's back in Washington, I understand. We have, apparently, according to a 1968 report, which was published in 68 in Berlin, Who's Who in the CIA. At that time, they listed Richard Dwyer as having been CIA since 1959.
Did Mr. Dwyer answer any of your questions?
Mr. Dwyer has refused to even talk to the FBI. He's never been questioned by the House Staff Committee. They said they didn't feel it necessary to question because they didn't believe any of this, so they didn't think it was necessary to ever question him. He stayed down in Guyana for several months, and till the FBI decided to stop asking for him to come in and answer questions. The FBI, since that time, has lost all interest in talking to Mr. Dwyer.
We're going to pick up with more conversation with Joe Holsinger, the former administrative assistant, because of the importance of this subject and the position held by our guests. We're going to go to your calls in about 7 minutes as we piece together this incredible scenario of Joe Holsinger, the former administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan, as kind of a mass mind control clinic. The CIA somehow involved murders and not suicides, etc. Joe was telling me while the news was on that there have been some peculiar deaths following this.
A few months ago in Berkeley, California, 3 people were killed in their home, Al and Jeannie Mills and their daughter. Al and Jeannie Mills were defectors from the People's Temple who had run something called the Human Freedom Center in Berkeley. It's a center for people who had fled from the People's Temple or in San Francisco or elsewhere, and for concerned relatives who had relatives in Jonestown. And so they had been very active. They had also taped practically all of the radio broadcasts from Guyana to San Francisco. And they were working on a theory that some of these tapes had some sort of code to them, that they were, and they had been turning over a lot of information to our government on their research. But a few months ago, they were found murdered in their home. The interesting thing is that there was an attempt to place the blame on the son, who was about 15 and would have been sort of, I guess, high on marijuana or something in another room, hadn't heard anything. But he passed the lie detector test. There was no So there's
no solution.
But no, the interesting thing to me is that there were neighbors who reported seeing 3 men driving away in a car, and they had, I think, the license number of the car, but everybody's discounted that, and they're not pursuing that lead. They keep trying to pin it on the son, even though he passed the lie detector test and there was no powder burns on his hands. So I think that the Mills murder should be part of this investigation. A more thorough, it's one of those unsolved things that kind of fades away.
I know. If the CIA had all this set up going, and we're trying to rationalize this insane world, why didn't they go to Congressman Ryan, who, while curious and a hell of a congressman, was also a hell of an American? And why didn't they say to him, Leo, lay off this? It's a involved kind of thing. We'll tell you about why let him go down there like that, which would not only get him killed, but blow their whole thing?
Well, this is what should have been done, obviously. One of the problems was that Leo was the author of something called the Hughes-Ryan Bill in December of 1974. It was Senator Harold Hughes in the Senate and Leo Ryan in the House. The Hughes-Ryan Bill provided for oversight of the CIA by the appropriate committees or subcommittees in Congress. And this bill provided that the CIA should report all covert activities to the appropriate oversight committees of Congress in timely fashion after they had been undertaken. The CIA did not want such oversight. As a matter of fact, just within the last few months, they have succeeded in practically getting rid of almost all oversight, and in fact killing the Hughes-Ryan Bill. We now know that they had a covert operation in Guyana which was not reported to the oversight committees in accordance with the law. In other words, I'm saying the CIA broke the law and did not report this to Leo. Leo was on that oversight committee because he had been the author of that legislation. And it's entirely possible that the reason they didn't report it at all to anyone on the committee, was because of Leo's interest in down there. And it wouldn't be the first time the CIA had simply broken the law to go ahead with something it wanted to do. Now, again, the CIA has many elements to it, and I think there may be some of them act pretty independently.
3 years ago, would you have believed the story you're telling?
No, I wouldn't have believed it a year ago. As a matter of fact, I was told about the mind control thing shortly after Jonestown happened, and I discounted and said, that's too far out.
Have you received a great deal of press on this, Joe?
Received some press in the Bay Area, but for some reason
nothing here.
It isn't picked up on the wire services. It isn't Washington Post. It seems to be almost a national security matter that's hands off, and I think that some sort of word has been given from the White House to the media saying this is touchy. This is a national interest. We not talk about this.
You know, guys like you who get into situations like this, normal people who are close to someone and rather straight people or administrative aides, there begins to be the thought, I know this has happened to others, many of whom have been proved correct, that you're paranoid, that you can't believe that Leo just died the way he died.
Right.
You ever look in the mirror and say, am I going crazy? Or
yes, I have, and I've just simply wondered with myself whether or not somehow I'm caught up in something that I've tried to be very careful about what I've said. I've tried to be conservative because I don't want to get off on the various scenarios and get caught up in this seamless web of paranoia. But there's too much here that has not been investigated, and I would like to be proven wrong.
But where is the investigation now? Nowhere?
Well, the House, the subcommittee was on international operations, and they took their report to the House. I'm not sure that sometimes they call it the International Relations Committee, others call it the Foreign Affairs Committee, but they voted to refer the matter to the House Select Committee on Intelligence and ask them to investigate my charges. The House Select Committee on Intelligence supposedly is evaluating those now and will issue a report on what they think. They've never called me. I don't know who they've called anybody, but their sort of in-house evaluation of my testimony and the charges that I and others made.
You want a full congressional investigation of this whole thing?
Yes, but I'm not at all sure that, I don't think we're going to get it. I think people say, hey, leave it alone, it's gone, it's past, 900 people, what the heck, and maybe the government's involved and we have other things to do. I think people say, why go back? So I think that only if we get more information out, only if the public becomes aroused, will we ever force that full-scale congressional investigation, which has to come will come only if we become aroused and people start asking questions and saying something was wrong, we have to know about it.
So you want listeners then to contact their congressman?
Yes, and I also want anybody who has any information bearing on the tragedy in Jonestown to get in touch with me or with your station and to get that information to me. There are bits and pieces, and we have to put those together, and I need help.
I'm sure if you wrote to my producer, they can forward it right on to you.
Yes, you have my address.
Okay, you just write to Jack Kirby, Care Mutual, if you have any thoughts on this, and if you think it should be investigated, contact your congressman. We will now hear what you have to say to Mr. Holsinger directly. We'll go to your phone calls following these messages.
It's your way of looking good. You're looking good. Having fun in summer like you should. Avon took light florals, lush wood notes, and a refreshing touch of citrus.
Out Guyana, was the CIA involved? Joe Holsinger thinks yes. He was the former administrative aide to the late Congressman Leo Ryan. We'd be interested in your thoughts and questions, and we go to Medina, Ohio. Hello.
Hello. I think certain things have been established, such as the CIA's MK-Ultra, Project Artichoke mind control experiments. An interesting thing is that before it was even revealed in the regular press through some of these Senate committees, I used to read the national, the U.S. Labor Party's newspaper, and they had all of this information prior to the ABC special, the Church Committee, and the rest of it. They were writing about this, and they had exactly the same view.
Are you saying that what Mr. Holsinger is saying tonight does not surprise you?
It does surprise me, but is there another, is he aware of the fact that I recall reading some articles in the Labor Party's newspaper about that time that Mr. Gregory Bateson was one of those implicated in this MK-Ultra CIA mind control program, and that he had been in contact with Jim Jones while Jim Jones was still in California?
I've heard that recently. Within the last month, was after my testimony in Washington and after I made my first statements about the MK-Ultra program, which I was really not very much aware of. It was after that some of these people got in touch with me with these charges about Bateson. But that's come to me within the last few weeks. I was not aware of it before.
Thank you. By the way, if you have any further information on this, you can send it to Jack Kirby, Care Mutual, Arlington, Virginia, 22202, and write in the corner of the envelope for Mr. Holsinger, Holsinger. That'll make it simpler, and we can forward it right on to him. And we go to Cleveland, Ohio. Hello.
Oh, hello, Larry. I'm not surprised at all what I hear Mr. Holsinger saying, because I read everything I could find about the Jonestown tragedy, and I always suspected that we had never been told the truth, but I came to a different conclusion. I thought that because Mr. Jones had applied to the Soviets for permission to move his people to Russia, that someone in our government, possibly the CIA, allowed them to go through with this suicide thing because they had been practicing it, because it would have been such a blow to U.S. prestige to have all these people ask for asylum in Russia. And
how do you react to that?
And then they shot Jones.
Yeah, I got you, Joe.
Well, my theory on that, and this is only a theory, is that Jones was using our government as a devil figure, our country, and the heaven or the place to refuge was the Soviet Union. And I think that was merely
Ruse?
It was really something to keep control of people, saying that things may be tough, but we have this potential assignment. I don't think the Soviet Union was ever serious about accepting Jones or any of those people.
No, I don't think so either. I have one question. Do you think that Mark Lane was used in this instance as a patsy to discredit him forever in his investigations about the Kennedy assassination?
I have very mixed feelings about Mark Lane. I think that he can be anywhere at any time and anything to anybody. There's no way of knowing about Mark Lane, and I don't trust his role in all of this, and I just simply don't trust Mark Lane. He seems to be all over the lot, and he changes position like the wind, and it's impossible for me to give any credence to him.
Thank you. Is he supporting you in this investigation request?
I have not made any contact with him.
Westmoreland, Kansas. Hello.
Larry, I would like to ask Mr. Holsinger, how did this get back to the States so fast on TV and the press when everybody was supposed to be killed or wounded? And the second question is, what do you think of CBS movie, The Guyana Tragedy?
Well, the first question, how did the information get back so fast? We had conflicting reports getting back. I think that it was several days before most of the media was able to get in there. Some people got in, a few selected people got in early, but they were fed the information the government wanted them to have, and that's my belief, that our government carefully constructed a mythology of Jonestown, constructed the sort of stories they wanted us to hear and believe, and that doesn't jibe with the facts at the time. As far as that movie is concerned, or that TV show, I admit I only watched a very short part of it. I had heard ahead of time what it was, the gist it was to be, and I think it was very far from reality. I don't think there was much to it that checks with my knowledge of what happened.
Yes, Larry?
Yeah.
This is another thing. I'm sorry you had to have two of these highly topics on for the evening. We could go on all night on...
I know, but Mr. Holsinger was in town today. We would have loved to arrange it for the beginning, but this way the whole West Coast gets the chance to hear it right at the start. Sometimes they work out that way, but I appreciate it, and we did have the Trilateral Commission earlier. Cleveland, Ohio, for Joe Holsinger. Hello.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for Mr. Holsinger. I wondered if there were, in fact, any survivors from the Jonestown incident that were interviewed and what the results were of the interviews, and also if there are any books or reports documenting the CIA experiments he spoke of earlier.
There were, as far as I know, only two survivors. One was a young man who walked away saying he was going to go get a stethoscope. I talked to him, who incidentally he said to me that there was no way that Gary and Lane got out the way that Lane claimed in his book. That it was impossible. They had to have been led out by somebody. The other survivor was a young man who had been wounded, or some way, and had apparently feigned death, and he got away the next day. Somehow got back to the States, and it was either in January or February of 1979, within 2 months after he returned. He was shot to death at night in the street in Detroit by persons unknown. Those are the only two that I know of. And then what was the last question again, Larry?
Were there any books or reports out published documenting the CIA experiments you spoke of earlier?
There have been several books published on the MK Ultra program, and I don't have those at my hand. We'd have to check someplace else. I have it in my notes here, but I'm not plugging any books on the air here. I just know that there are books that have been written over the years on MK Ultra.
Thank you. Feeling as you feel, you must feel what emotions you must be going through.
Well, I've
put it. Government was responsible for that.
Well, I've put aside, hopefully, myself, the feelings of revenge or feelings of shock about this. I now believe that my role, if any, is that simply of as Leo would have, one of the American citizen who has seen something wrong and believes that it should be corrected for the future. Because if we let this go by and don't check it out, it's a little bit like the assassination of John Kennedy. If we check it out, if we don't go after it, it becomes more and more possible this sort of thing can happen in the future. And the only way we can ever protect ourselves is to make sure that the truth becomes known about these things.
And I admire you, certainly not a zealot, for saying you hope you're wrong.
Well, I certainly do. I hope that there is some other way. What I'm saying, is not something even I'm absolutely certain of. These reports have come to me. They seem to answer the facts. I realize that they are theories, but I hope there is some other explanation. But I do know that our government has been and is today covering up a great deal about what happened there.
And there's no doubt there should be a congressional investigation with the CIA people and others called to take the stand. Spokane, Washington, hello.
Good morning, Larry, Mr. Holsinger.
Good morning.
I just wanted to ask a question. Maybe I believe Leo Ryan was a great American and totally dedicated to his work, and I'm sure you're dedicated to his memory and doing what you feel is right. I would like to ask a question maybe an investigator would ask. If the American government was vitally interested in the government of Guyana, why would not the CIA be vitally interested in an American commune there of such strength as People's Temple?
You have a very good question, because our government has consistently claimed that the FBI and the CIA never investigated the People's Temple. Jones had a police record. Jones was arrested down on a morals charge in Los Angeles. That record was sealed and protected by the police authorities in Los Angeles and the judicial system. He had powerful friends in Sacramento and Washington. There were a lot of charges brought against Jones, which somehow, and he was considered to be sort of a left-wing nut, but somehow our government never saw fit to investigate Jones. We never had the FBI, CIA, who are everywhere, investigate this, and they never have any reports. That's incredible. And you have to wonder why those agencies, which are usually omnipresent, disclaim any knowledge over the years of ever checking in anything on Jones.
Thank you. That part is incredible. We'll be right back with Joe Holsinger. He's going to be with us for another full hour. We have plenty of calls coming in. If you get a busy signal, hang up and call back. Comes for Joe Holsinger, Omaha, Nebraska. Hello.
Yes. Hello, Larry.
Hi.
All right. And I have a question for Mr. Holsinger.
Yes.
All right. And I have two. The first one is, have any of the families of the victims give you any support?
Yes. I have been in touch with members of those families, and frankly, many of them are so shocked and all, they just kind of want to, they're grieved, and they feel oppressed by the media coverage. They feel that they've been portrayed, many of them because they're black, as having been less than American citizens. The mythology of Jonestown has been that these were somehow dissatisfied and unhappy people who left their own country and went off to some foreign land and committed suicide and good riddance, and that's simply not the case. If you know black families as I do, you know that they have a great love for children and family they have, and the fact that they would all kill their children this way is incredible. So they have helped to some extent, but many of them are very much afraid of what happened and what would happen to them, and frankly, one of the things a problem for me is the fear that I run into on the part of the families.
And my second question is, could you go into a little bit more detail about the bodies being found up under the bodies?
Yes. This was, I'll give you exact chronology. On November 19th, when the Guyanese troops entered Jonestown, the body count, which they thought was as accurate as possible, was 409. Wow. On November 20th, the reports were down to 383, and 82 of them children. 2 days later, the media reported, November 22nd, the media reported 405. November 23rd, the death count was still at 409. The next day, on November 24th, it jumped to 775, and the following day it jumped up to 909. And so when the Deputy Prime Minister of Guyana, Ptolemy Reed, broke the news to the Guyanese Parliament, an opposition member stood up and charged the government with a mass cover-up, and they adjourned the Parliament. And our government put to the story that the new bodies, according to the Pentagon spokesman, were found in the same clearing as the original 400, and they had been found buried under other bodies, and 3 deep in some areas. But the original people who turned them over and toe tagged them, they weren't there. And this one fact alone can crack this case.
Couldn't it be another fact, like if the bodies were turned over, couldn't it have been something like maybe they were sheltered from the elements? Wouldn't there have been stains or disfigurations of the skin or the body or anything like that? To also kind of just give that as just such an easy giveaway.
I don't understand the question.
Well, like if a body is laying on top of a body, and like I say, it might have been a little time before it was discovered. I mean, couldn't it have been like, well, the clothing maybe, you know, could have been...
It could have been in one or two isolated cases, but when you change from 400 to 900 people, the odds become unbelievable.
Thank you. San Mateo, California. Hello.
Yeah, Larry, this is Jim, and I'm a first-time caller.
Hi.
And my question is, I live here, and I was very shocked about the whole thing. And the question is, was Mr. Ryan, at the time, was he warned before going down there from Mr. Jones that trouble would happen, or was he warned at all?
He was not warned by our government. In fact, he warned our government that there was dangers there. He told them of our investigations, but everything had been given to our government, including back in May of 1978 by the concerned relatives, they ignored. They consistently said that they had checked out that there was no problems, and the stories that kept coming back by our State Department personnel, who we now think were not really State Department personnel, was everything was fine. They put the story out immediately after the disaster that they had warned Leo. But Jackie Spear and I were able to put the lie to that, so they changed their story, said, well, admitted that maybe they were wrong, but they tried to put that story out. They never did. They consistently said nothing was wrong, and they now admit that they had information that they, such as the, well, we knew there were drugs down there, we knew the guns were down there. And I want to ask this question of all of the listeners. We had literally thousands and thousands of doses of drugs, millions of dollars worth of drugs, mind-controlled drugs, an arsenal of weapons down there that was smuggled from this country into Jonestown. And we wonder how all this could have happened without at least the tacit approval of our government. It's impossible to do that kind of smuggling without at least the FBI.
I must admit, that is strange.
CIA, and here was a supposedly revolutionary organization, and they got away with all of this. How?
Yeah, thank you for calling. We're going to break for news. A word from your local stations and a full hour to go with Joe Holsinger, the former administrative assistant to late Congressman Leo Ryan. He's testified before the House International Relations Committee, and he's trying to get a full-scale investigation of the whole Guyana situation. He hopes he's wrong. He believes the CIA is strongly implicated. We'll be back following the news with more calls for Joe Holsinger. I'm Larry King, and this is Mutual, your network for news and sports.
It's been effectively gutted. Many members of Congress are afraid to ever criticize the CIA because we know in this country the necessity of having an intelligence gathering operation. But in addition to that and appearing unpatriotic, the simple fact is that the Ryan of Hughes Ryan was murdered in Guyana. He was a man who was a critic of some of these operations and who investigated it, and he came to a rather bad end, and I think that most members of Congress have too many other things in their mind to worry too much about this.
Silver Spring, Maryland. Hello?
Yes, Mr. Holsinger, I'm having a problem with your scenario, and in three particular points.
All right.
Point one and question one.
All right.
If Jones was intensely devoted to communism, as we have been led to believe, how could it follow that the U.S. government could use his church or his people to help sustain the government in Guyana?
Jones said he was intensely devoted to communism, but I'm not so sure that he wasn't simply running a
good cover story.
A good cover story, that he was simply somewhat leader that somebody picked up on. Let me quote you from Mark Lane's book. I've already told you what I think about Mark Lane, but let me quote you this from Mark Lane's book, from the conclusion of chapter 5, because you get all sorts of conflicting stories. This is a quote from the book, The Strongest Poison, about Jones. One of his closest aides, who survived the end of the People's Temple, said, quote, when under the influence of drugs in Jonestown, he, Jones, claimed that he was a true, loyal, and patriotic American. And it was a terrible shame that he was obligated to remain in Guyana. He said people would never know what a true patriot he was. That's part of that quote.
May I just say that it just, you know, so much of what I've heard was talk about communism being the way and the whole flirtation with the Soviet Union, and that's why I brought it up.
I understand, because what happened was that Jones apparently used this, he found people who had felt rejected by society, who felt alone, who had felt unloved, and he gave them some hope. And he gave them hope because of his social views and said this was the way. What we're really looking at is, I think, a misuse of religion. I think that we're looking at a possibility that possibility that at least a few of these cults were to take confused people or people who had without hope, and then to lead them off away from the rest of the world in isolated areas so these experiments could be done.
Since I have 3 points, I better move on quickly.
Right.
The bodies and the body count.
Mm-hmm.
Why would it not be possible if, in fact, the children were put in the middle and in the middle of a circle? If people went in and perhaps did not count carefully and also didn't turn over and label all of the bodies at the time of the initial tragedy, why would it not be possible several days later, when a thorough investigation was done and the bodies were uncovered or turned over, that they would in fact find the children underneath?
Well, a major who was there at the time said it was impossible that the count could have been that far off.
That seems strange.
The U.S. Army itself, in question recently, says they can have a complete body count up to within a few thousand people within a matter of hours.
Yeah.
What we're asked to believe is that somehow our troops that went in there, and our people went in there, were so ineffectual that they, under these circumstances, and so confused that they simply everybody goofed up. And we're asked to believe all along, the State Department, our Army, everybody's in there, that they all goof up all the time in this particular circumstance. And it's not possible to miscount from 400 bodies to 900 bodies under any circumstances.
Yeah, well, I thought it was the Guianan Army or police.
They were in there the next day. We had one of our people in the next day, a State Department man named Dan Weber, who was in the next day, sent out from Georgetown, who helped to count the bodies.
The final point.
And we had, our people were in there a day following.
The final point, I think it was Krauss, the gentleman from the Post.
Charles Krauss, yes.
And my very faulty memory recalls that his book claims that Dwyer spent the night at the Port Kaituma airport, and that in fact he took charge of things around there, and Krauss was very complimentary of him. If in fact I do remember correctly, and this is what Krauss said, how could Dwyer have gone back into the camp after the shooting?
Well, Jackie Spear, for one, says that he was gone more than he was there.
Oh.
She recalls him having been spread-eagled out on the airstrip away from everybody. There were other people that said that he was gone more than he was there. He supposedly was wounded, but he was completely ambulatory, and we've been a question of whether he really had that wound or not. But there are at least a couple of people who say he was gone more than he was there, and it was possible for him to go back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indianapolis, hello.
Yes, I have two basic questions I like to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And first, preface it with a little thing. The people like Jim Jones worry me because he had a little sign there at his base regarding those who do not remember history or are forced to repeat it. So I agree with the gentleman's background that there should be a full investigation. That a man like Hitler was allowed to spellbind the German people, and a man like Jones was able to spellbind a group of people, and a man like Charles Manson needs close investigation and needs people like this gentleman to push for an investigation to get the whole story so that we know. My two questions.
Mm-hmm.
With Mr. Dwyer, if he is connected to the CIA, I would like to propose another scenario and ask you what you think of it. Suppose he was planted by the CIA that knew of Jim Jones' socialist background, at least the fact that it was supported by FBI tapes that he was a socialist, that they knew about this background and planted one of their men in order to make a thorough investigation and in order to relay any information that was needed as a part of their intelligence gathering. He realized that the White Knight was coming, left, found out after the death of Leo Ryan and the rest of them that there was another scenario going on. Dwyer went back to Jonestown but was too late and may have, in interest of national security, killed Jones himself as part of a CIA plan. Now, how about that idea or that scenario?
That's possible. It's possible that if he did go back there as claimed and as indicated in the tapes, that he may have tried to protect his country. He may also, if he had done that, tried to wipe out any evidence of the now known collusion between our government and Jones, and perhaps that might have been another reason for it. So either one of the reasons is possible. It's I just don't know which one would be correct.
Oh, I see. My second one is regarding a question that hasn't been asked yet.
Now, in your investigations of the theory or the scenario you create, one thing has not been asked. Have you made any detailed integral investigation into the background of Jim Jones from Indiana to Guyana that would support your contentions that this paranoid man would support an organization that has the inference of Big Brother is watching over you?
We've checked Jones's background. There have been books written on it, going back to Indiana, to his personal background. We know that he went into New York to study some of the practices in some of the churches there for leadership, or what do you call it, and that he was a showman and he was interested in leading people. That we know that. We know he had his potential, and the question I have is whether or not he was one of those people who might have been picked out to lead such a cult and perhaps to provide a vehicle for some of this experimentation. That's what the conclusion I came up with after investigating his background.
All right, thank you. We'll be right back with Joe Holsinger. Again, if you have any information on this which could help Mr. Holsinger, who is calling for a major investigation and certainly at least building up enough circumstantial evidence to warrant it, you can write to us. Just write to Jack Kirby, our producer, care of the Mutual Broadcasting System, Arlington, Virginia 22202. And if you would, on the envelope, just write the name in the corner, Joe Holsinger, Holsinger, so we can forward it directly on to Joe in Northern California. We'll be back following this message.
From the nation's capital, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Portions of tonight's program are repeated in the Western Time Zone. Now, here's Larry.
Back we go with phone calls for Joe Holsinger, and we go to Chesney, South Carolina. Hello.
Hello. Mr. Holsinger, do you have any information on the recent trials in Georgetown, Guyana, where the people involved were tried under Guyanese law for murder and so forth? Didn't I read something within the last couple of months that there was an acquittal down there?
Yes, that was the trial of Larry Layton.
Yes.
He was tried not for the murder of Leo Ryan, but he was tried for an attempted murder assault on two members of the People's Temple who were trying to leave at the time. This would happen in a plane. The question was never clear whether his gun had blanks in it or not. But the interesting defense made by his defense attorney, in which the jury believed, was that he was drugged and not responsible at the time of the incident, and in effect that he used the word brainwashed and under drugs, and that was his defense. And so the Guyanese jury believed that. I'd like to further state that I don't believe that there will ever be a trial of Larry Layton in this country for the murder of Leo or in any circumstances. I think that it's taken over a year to get that trial in Guyana, and when it happened, he was acquitted. I'm not surprised.
Right. Well, as Carl area, I was going to ask if you think there will ever be a trial of anyone else there for Congressman Ryan.
No, I don't think it'll ever happen. Because once you have a trial going, you then are able to subpoena records, and you're able to go through legal maneuvers to get evidence otherwise would not become available, and I don't think they want to risk that.
Thank you very much. Minneapolis, hello.
Yes, hello, Mr. Holsinger.
Good evening. Good morning.
Good morning, that is. I was wondering, I have something that you might follow up on if you haven't already. Have you done any background investigation on the founder of Synanon, the first encounter group therapy organization that was...
I'm familiar with Synanon. As a matter of fact, I was once, many years ago, a sponsor of Synanon and helped to contribute to it because I thought it was a good thing to help get people off of drugs. So I met Charles Diedrich personally years ago, and I became disenchanted with the ways that I saw it was going, along with many business people who pulled away from it. But Synanon has been mentioned as one of those who had tried this sort of what we almost call encounter groups and people shouting at other people, and it's all part of a pattern. I'm not sure whether it connects with this at all, but I'm familiar with Synanon, yes.
The reason I bring it up is that it was the first group, and many of the techniques they used purportedly were on the same line as what the POWs in Korean underwent. And there was a week article last year that supposedly said that the Synanon group had given the People's Temple group military arms at some time. And I was wondering if there was some connection as far as the type of mind control they did use, the people temples, whether it was on this line. And I must add also that even though I'm a layman with no inside information, I have thought that it was very likely that this was some type of scientific experiment in behavior modification. I'm not saying the deaths were, but I had that thought myself.
Oh, I think you're pretty close to it. I know of no link between Synanon directly and People's Temple. There may have been, but I do know that they did both use the encounter, the group encounter thing where one person would be the target, and they would all come after that one person.
Thank you. We go to Chicago. Hello.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Holsinger.
Good morning.
I'm trying to determine if anybody knows how much was involved in that cult deal in Jonesville.
What do you mean, how much was involved? Money or what?
How much money was involved in that cult?
Well, the receiver, who's now has charge of the assets that have been recovered, I believe, is found about $12 million in assets, but I believe that reports where there's anywhere from 25 to 40 million.
Unbelievable. Oakland, California. Hello.
Hello, how's it going, Larry? You have a good show.
Thank you.
First became aware of you when I was in New York through Candy. So, by the way, how is she? She still got a show going there?
Oh, she sure does.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. I was very alarmed when this happened. I was in California, went down. The Black Panthers game that gave the same theory the week of the incident that Mr. Holsinger is giving tonight. I was wondering, can you explain the dead animals that they found around the bodies? What would have caused that, you know?
They were either shot or injected with a poison.
Also, have you had a chance to interview Mr. Lawyer Charles Gary? I was sort of questioned Mark Lane, but Gary seemed somewhat pretty honest. What do you think?
I talked to Mr. Gary before the tragedy occurred. I talked to him just within a week before, just after Leo left for Washington, and then a few days before he went to Guyana. I've talked to him only that one time.
Also, are you familiar with the lawyer that lived in California that Jones had the baby by his wife that died there? His connection?
Tim Stone, yes. Yes, I know about Tim Stone.
Did they have CIA connections? A pretty innocent person in this situation?
I really don't know. It's hard to determine. I know that we had worked with Stone before Leo went down. Whether Stone was what he said he was or not, I simply don't know.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Jackson Heights, New York. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Holsinger, I am researching this subject. I've spoken to priests. If you listen to WWDJ, you'll hear people giving the same sort of testimony. This is international, and indeed they are doing priests and people in other religions. And Pat Robinson also went to New York to study churches in New York. And I am a victim, and I can tell you it's a living hell.
All right, thank you. That lady calls frequently, and we have referred it to a doctor, and I don't think it's on the subject. Holland, Michigan. Hello.
Hello. From what I saw on the first television reports, that aircraft appeared to be somewhat shot up. How'd they get it out of there?
Well, there were two aircraft. One was a larger aircraft, and it had the wheel shot off of it, or tire shot out. And it was a small plane that left. And this small plane left after Dwyer talked to Guy Spence, the pilot of the larger plane. Guy Spence, and you read Charles Krause's account, Guy Spence got into the smaller plane and took off. Even though there were severely wounded people there, they simply took off immediately after Dwyer talked to them. And I think that was done by Dwyer to Spence to get the message back to this country and about what happened. So you had two planes and instead of one, and that's why you saw one plane show up, but the other one got away, the small one got away.
Okay. The people that did all the shooting shot many of the Guyana people, the victims. Were those people that had gone down there to seek refuge and were sort of, quote, made the police, or were these Cubans or other?
No, these were all American citizens who had gone down and were members of the People's Temple.
The body count is a continuing problem, of course, and I'm wondering if there wasn't or isn't another location in that part of the hemisphere where there's another one of these Guyana things in process.
Well, it's called Colonia Dignitat. It's located in Brazil. And it's a German operation.
If so, all right. this body count problem? Could it have, could they have added some people, say, in that same day or that night or something like that?
I don't know what happened. I don't know that it took 5 or 6 days and the figures changed drastically in 5 or 6 days, and just how that mystery can be solved, I don't know.
Thank you. We have a half hour to go with Joe Holsinger, the former administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan. We are discussing his fascinating conclusions and investigations on the subject that won't go away, the subject of Guyana and the tragedy of November 18th, 1978. Mr. Holsinger calling for a full congressional investigation. And certainly based on his information, it is warranted. This is the Larry King Show. We'll be back following news headlines with more questions on the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
This is Nana. This is Mutual, your network for news and sports.
Close to home radio, KXRX San Jose. Our phone lines are now...
Hello.
Good morning, Larry. I would not have stayed up because you ordinarily have an open phone America, but, you know, the Guyana tragedy had affected me so much. And when you had Mr. Holsinger on the air, I thought, I've got to ask a few questions.
Go ahead.
And Lori was so... you give credit to so many people.
All right, go ahead.
On your program.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do that very rapidly. First of all, I would like to know why did Jones choose Guyana, Jonestown, Guyana, as a place for his people to go? And number two, how powerful or important was his influence with the CIA, and why? And why did the late Leo Ryan, who was obviously a very conscientious congressman, consider it so very important to go to Guyana when indeed and in fact his constituents were in North Carolina? And finally...
No, you're wrong. His constituents were right in San Francisco.
Well, that is Northern California.
Oh, you said North Carolina.
Oh, I thought you said North Carolina.
No, Northern California. I apologize if I said that. And fourthly, does Mr. Holsinger have an idea what Mr. Jones' final objective or his ultimate goal was?
Can we run through those quickly?
All right. First of all, as I recall, the first question had to do with why Jones chose Guyana.
Yeah.
He was, after he came out of Brazil in 1963, in the 60s, he was making trips into that whole area, into Guyana, into Grenada, into several of those areas, and had been to Guyana in the early 70s. And this was before he ever had any claims of being persecuted in Northern California. He later claimed he left because he couldn't have a peaceful time in Northern California, but in reality, for the several years he had been going down there and looking around.
So I guess... Isn't Guyana under British control?
No, Guyana became independent in the mid-60s. And in fact...
prior to that, was it?
It was under British control until about 1965, but the only thing that I can come up with is that he looked for an isolated spot. And why he was looking for an isolated spot in the late 60s and early 70s is a very good question. I think that my response to that may be that they were looking for an isolated spot for experimentation. As far as Leo Ryan going down and why he went down, Leo was a very stubborn guy, and when he had his own constituents in his own district with a problem, but every other member of Congress gave up who was contacted about it. Only Leo kept on going because he became convinced that there was human rights violations going on, and our State Department was stonewalling it, and Leo was determined to kick down that door.
Thank you. He was that kind of guy. We go to Washington Courthouse. Hello.
Yeah, hello, Larry.
Hi.
How you doing?
Fine.
Let me tell you, a couple more heavy nights like this, and the whole country will be walking around with necks under their eyes.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask your guest one question, or a couple, but the first one is I can't hardly believe that he could not watch a CBS special. I mean, as closely related as he was to it.
But sometimes you can get too close, and you know...
It was very painful for me, and I also knew that it was from my early previews that I had heard from a TV editor that it was going to be misrepresented, and I was going to get so angry watching it that I decided I simply couldn't stand to see more history rewritten.
I guess I can see your point being that closely related. And, okay, a couple other short questions. concerning the CIA involvement or whoever you figure was involved, do you feel that maybe the publicity that all of Jonestown's people, they've got so many relatives and so many cult friends, that they're out to get all the other people, that maybe that's a CIA plot also?
No, I don't think that there's anybody out to get anybody. As far as the relatives are concerned, haven't seen any evidence of any.
I mean, well, I guess what I'm saying is, well, so many people were going underground, and everyone was so concerned with the people in the U.S. after that happened.
Well, the hit squad story was put out, and we never found any credibility to that, and I don't know where that hit squad idea came from. I just wonder whether that wasn't part of some sort of mythology.
Thank you. If you have any information in this case and thoughts and want to contact Joe Holsinger, write to Jack Kirby, producer, Larry King Show, Mutual Broadcasting System, Arlington, Virginia, 22202. And in the corner of the envelope, write Mr. Holsinger on the envelope, and we'll forward it directly to Joe, former congressional administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan. Reno, Nevada. Hello.
Good morning, Larry. I find the show very interesting. I wanted to ask your guest a question or two, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'd like to find out what kind of pressure he might be under personally, him and his family, because of this investigation or the inquiries he's making.
I've had no pressure put on me so far.
Stonewall, though, you know.
Well, yeah, I'm not getting a cooperation, but I'm not receiving any calls or any pressure. I think it's rather obvious that if I had any such pressure, I would immediately make it known to the public at large.
Well, this is true, but I would imagine anyone that makes inquiries into anything the CIA or FBI does that they don't want to be known publicly, they're going to shut doors to you like you wouldn't believe.
Well, they have shut the doors to me, yes.
Well, I'm going to write you a letter. I personally know of several connections, you know, but I know also of the history of some things back in 1961 to 63, back in Baltimore, Maryland, when
right.
you mentioned John Hopkins, some people that came out of that institute that
right.
were connected with...
All right, do you have another question?
Well, not really, but I will...
If you'll send information to this station, they'll get it to me. I
Just write
very
to
much.
Jack Kirby, Care Mutual. Write Joe's name on the envelope, though.
Okay, but one other thing. Is he familiar with Delancey Street in San Francisco?
Yes, I am.
Have you found any connection?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. San Francisco, hello.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question as to whether or not he actually believes that concerning the investigation he's asking Congress to pursue, based upon what we've seen, according, with the Kennedy assassination of the king, that this investigation that he would like to see happen wouldn't be a whitewash and a cover-up like the ones we've seen in the past.
It may turn out that way, but all I can do is try and hope that we get the breaks and hope that public opinion will force something. But I'm not willing to sit back and agree in advance that nothing can be done. I have to try.
I understand. Do you basically believe that if we took the entire matter of these investigations out of, like, the Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassination, plus this one, out of the hands of the Congress and placed them in the hands of people, and then forced people to give us the information that we need in other ways, in terms of, like, whole states getting involved in cities and this type of thing, that we would come up with far greater answers? Because based on what we've seen for the last 10 years or so, it's kind of frightening to believe that we're in a country like this, that these things can go unhappened. I mean...
Well, I understand your question. My response would be that we have our democratic institutions. We have the responsibility placed in the hands of the Congress. And I think that the Congress will react if public opinion turns to demand it. And I think that we have to get enough information and get it out to the public so that they will demand it of the Congress. Congress can and will be responsive, but they usually are followers and not leaders when it comes to these matters.
Thank you. I would say that's true. We'll be back with Joe Holsinger following these messages. Arlington, Virginia. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Holsinger, were you one of the participants in the primary elections for the seat formerly occupied by Congressman Ryan?
Yes, I won the Democratic nomination and lost in a runoff.
I see. And who's the congressman that's currently occupying the seat?
Bill Royer, R-O-Y-E-R, and Bill, incidentally, is helping, and he's the one who's been pushing for the investigation. He's done a good job of it.
Okay. I don't agree with most of what you said, but I think you made a very telling comment in saying that a lot of people felt that the people that went down there and died in one way or another, it was good riddance. I don't agree with that. I think that's a very good point on your part, and I hope you can keep pressing on with it. But I think at the base of it, you're going to find that what it was a large movement of people that were deluded. And you did mention that there were mind-controlled drugs down there in large quantities?
Yes.
Speaking about other than Thorazine, what were the other drugs?
Well, there was sodium pentothal, there was chlorohydrate, and I have another list here of there. I mean, there was Quaaludes, Valium, Demerol.
No.
We have a whole laundry list of drugs that were found there in large quantities.
Okay, fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. This is the Larry King Show, Excelsior Springs, Missouri. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I got a couple of questions. First of all, I recently, I saw a movie, Deceived, and some of the people gave their testimonies about why they left, but I'm kind of be interested from your own perspective on some of the reasons that people actually joined the People's Temple.
Well, some of the people, quite a few people that joined had been in therapy, and had been at least one psychiatrist in the Bay Area referred large numbers of people there, and this same psychiatrist has been involved with drug counseling out there. So they were people who I would say were usually well-intentioned. They may have had problems in their home life. They may have had they were people simply who didn't feel loved for the most part, who were looking for some better way, who were looking for some friendship, and they thought they had heard about this, and here was somebody who they felt lived the ideals that other people gave but didn't live. And so that was the greatest attraction, was here was a living group, experimental group that really meant brotherhood and really meant Christianity. As it turned out, of course, Jones was anti-Christian, but he didn't, he gave a much different picture of that. So these were people who were looking for some sort of salvation, some sort of hope in life.
My next question is, do you know if anything's been done, investigation of the Unification Church?
I don't know about any of the other investigations of other churches. The only only connection I've had, other churches that I'd like to see investigated, I think would be the Church of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, which has to some extent been, supposedly there's been comments that it was been financed through the Korean CIA, which has links with ours.
Thank you very much. Omaha, Nebraska. Hello.
Yes. Mr. King?
Yes.
I hear you on WOW.
Correct.
And I like your show very much.
Thank you.
Listened to it for about a month now.
Thank you.
Before that, whenever I could pick it up on the other stations.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask your guest, Mr. Holsinger, would money help investigate what he has, going on right now? Would money help at all with his different deals? Well, really, I have three questions.
Well, the answer to the first question is no. We're doing what we can with people. I really see no way that money would be... We couldn't get enough money to really do the investigation, and I don't want to go out and start any fundraising, so I appreciate it, but I don't see how that would help right now.
Well, I appreciate it. If you did, I was wondering why you don't write a book, and if so, is that what you're really after, is money after all? I'm not trying to criticize you.
No, and I'm one of the few who's not writing a book. One thing is too painful for me, and I don't want to appear in any way to ever be personally cashing in on it.
Mr. Holsinger is out to clear up the mystery of the death and the murder of his friend, and it's leading into a much larger thing than that. Thank you for calling. We go to Ohio. Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
I'd like to ask one question.
Shoot.
Was Jimmy Jones once located at a camp called K. Lind in Alaska?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Well,
he may have been, but there are gaps in his history that we don't know about. About what year?
Now that I can't tell you for sure. It could be late 60s and it could be early 70s.
I would doubt it, sir.
Before that night.
You would doubt it?
Yes.
All right, we go to San Diego, California. Hello.
Yes. I'd like to ask Mr. Holsinger if there have been any research on the tapes that were coded from, that were called from Guyana. But he did make some, the couple in San Francisco who were murdered taped those calls. And I wondered if they had decided there were anything available or if the tapes were lost.
Well, they were investigating. They were investigating those tapes. They thought there might have been some code on them, and they were working with some sort of our government agencies on it. And I know they were reporting a lot of information to them prior to their deaths. And since their deaths, I believe those tapes have disappeared.
They have disappeared.
That's what I meant.
Sadly. We'll be back with our remaining moments with Joe Holsinger, former administrative assistant to late Congressman Leo Ryan. First, this message.
From the nation's capital, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Portions of tonight's program are repeated in the Western Time Zone. Now, here's Larry.
With Joe Holsinger, we go to Chicago. Hello.
Hey, Larry.
Hi.
Good morning, Mr. Holsinger.
Good morning.
I just wondered how the Reverend voted his people out there. Did he control their votes in the district that he was in?
Yes, he did, and they had not only their votes, but they turned out hundreds of workers on Election Day, and they had considerable influence in the election results in San Francisco.
Did he vote them absentee after he moved them to Guyana?
I don't know. There was some investigations, but I think after he moved to Guyana, they didn't attempt to have the same influence they had had before he moved down there.
I see. Well, he's not the only Reverend that's got a strong political hand, you know. Are they?
Well, yeah, that's the sort of tradition, I guess, in some places.
Certainly is. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting program.
Thank you. Reno, Nevada, hello.
Yes, earlier in the program you stated that the CIA is a necessary tool for information accumulation.
Yes.
And my question is, if we grant that the CIA is necessary for gathering intelligence, such as Soviet military strength, projections on economic, food, energy, other resource availability on a global basis, how does that justify covert operations that have backfired far more often against the United States and have ever succeeded?
Well, I think I indicated that our greatest problem was with covert operations, that it's the most ticklish part of any intelligence operation. Other nations have them, and we almost sometimes have to have our own capacity. But you see, it's an operation that has to be tightly held and controlled by the National Security Council and by the President of the United States. And so they are ultimately responsible. The President's ultimately responsible. And my bitter disappointment is that following the Jonestown tragedy, the only comment that President Carter ever made publicly was, "Let's not overreact." And I really fault this administration for their role in what has happened. And I think that we ultimately have to look to that administration leadership for control of the covert activities, and I don't think we're getting it.
My comment is the scenario you present for the Jonestown massacre in a way reminds me of the propaganda that came out against Eldridge Cleaver 10 years ago. And the comment is it kind of in a way demonstrates that America can squelch political dissent as well as the Soviets.
Well, I didn't think that was political dissent. I think that have been talking about political dissent. I think that to the extent that Jones dissented, it may have been a cover for something else. I don't think I've said anything about political dissent.
Thank you very much. Naples, Florida. Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Holsinger. Who was instrumental in getting Jones out of California?
Well, I think it was, as far as we know, it was Jones. Jones had come under fire and quite a few charges brought against him, and he claims that he left because he wanted to take young John Stone to Guyana to get him away from the court action that the mother and father were bringing to get the son back. And that was his claim. He also claimed he was being persecuted by the CIA and was persecuted by government agencies, and so he was going to take people to some place where they could be free. That was his claim. Now, whether that was the actual reason or not, I don't know, but that was his claim.
I wondered if they really had made him leave California.
Well,
because that's very hard to do, isn't it? If they go under a religious group. Pardon me.
Well, he not only He had a great deal of help, apparently, from our State Department taking all those people down there. The way was made smooth for him to take them down, I know that.
All right, thank you. We go to St. Petersburg, Florida. Hello.
Yes. I'd like to ask Mr. Hollinger how it is conceivable that anybody would ever listen to him over here, much less go over to Guyana and die for him.
Well, there were...
What did he have? What did
You mean Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones, yeah. Mr. Jones was a very much of a showman.
Oh, he wasn't. He wasn't even a good showman.
Well, he put on a show, and he tried the faith healing, and he had a lot of music, and he had his social message mixed into it that people wanted to listen to, and a lot of them bought his social message.
But why did he die for him?
I think they were murdered. I said I think most of them were murdered rather than committed suicide. Over 7 of the 900, according to the coroner down there, were murdered rather than committed suicide.
Mass murder.
Yeah, that was it.
Well...
And we called it, our government called it suicide because the American public would have demanded a lot more of an investigation of mass murder than they would of mass suicide.
New York City, hello.
Good morning, Larry. Thank you once again for bringing a very provocative theme on your show.
My pleasure.
My question is to Mr. Holsinger. From what you claim, Mr. Holsinger, I understand that James was simply conducting a mind control experiment on behalf of the CIA, and he was willing to kill nearly 1,000 people, carrying out the wishes of CIA to find out to what extent the mind control could go on. Is my understanding correct?
No, I'm saying that Jones was an instrument, but I think that Jones was not the only person involved. There was a group involved running that operation. Incidentally, with all the great medical facilities there and the daily checkups, all medical records have disappeared from Jonestown, despite the fact that every records are kept on everything else. So I'm saying that the possibility is there that this was a rather tightly controlled operation by a group, not just by Jones.
What prompted him to kill people ultimately? What was the final push? Did it come from CIA in your analysis, do you think?
I really don't know. I think it's possible that the circumstances were such building up that they decided to try the experiment to see if they could control people and get people to actually kill themselves. That's the horrible ultimate conclusion. I'm not sure that that's correct, but that's one possibility.
A last question. If an institution could simply do away with thousands of people like that, aren't you afraid for your own life, Mr. Holsinger?
Well, you can't be... Leo said before he went down, and when he was asked the question, he said, you can't be afraid, otherwise you can't ever do anything. So we're all, I think, pawns of fate, and just do what you have to do and try.
Thanks very much. Joe, I thank you very much for these 2 hours. I wish you every success. I hope you're wrong, and I wish you every success. If you'd like to contact Joe Holsinger with any information you may have, just write to Jack Kirby, Kirby, Care Mutual Broadcasting, Arlington, Virginia, 22202, and on the envelope, just write the name Joe Holsinger. If you think an investigation should be started, contact your congressman. Our guests in the first 3 hours tonight were Charles Heck, the North American Secretary of the Trilateral Commission, and Patrick Wood, co-author of Trilaterals over Washington. If you are now listening in the Pacific time zone, you will hear those first 3 hours played back with Charles Heck and Patrick Wood. And our guest the past 2 hours, in lieu of Open Phone America, has been Joe Holsinger, the former administrative assistant to the late Congressman Leo Ryan, who was killed in Jonestown, Guyana. Tomorrow night, special guest Bob Hope. Bob, who opens Thursday night at the Kennedy Center for a weekend stand with Suzanne Summers. Also, later in the evening tomorrow night, David Owens, the organic chemist, who says that you can fuel your own car and make the fuel in your own house. Bob Hope and others tomorrow night on The Larry King Show, all here on the Mutual Broadcasting System, your network for news and sports.
We take water for granted.